Hi there, I'm Dr. Katie Mineta. I'm so excited to announce the start of a new initiative from the Academy of Cognitive and Behavioral Therapies. Beginning this month, we'll be publishing a monthly blog featuring articles written by our diplomates and founding fellows, exploring different aspects and applications of high quality CBT. I'll be serving as the blog editor, and each month I'll also interview the authors to spotlight their work and promote the important projects they're contributing to. This initiative comes at an important time. Too often we are seeing therapists describe themselves as CBT practitioners, but without having had the advanced training that's needed to practice CBT as it was designed. Licensure alone doesn't guarantee competency. And patients who are actively seeking CBT deserve to receive evidence based care. Through this project, we want to give a platform to leaders in the field, highlight what real CBT looks like, and show why ongoing training and certification matter, not only for clinicians, but for the clients we serve. And I can't imagine a better way to begin. Our first blog comes from Dr. Janeé Steele, a diplomate with the Academy and an accomplished clinician, author, and educator, known for her work on multicultural applications of CBT. We are also so honored to be joined by Dr. Christine Podesky, co-founder of the Center for Cognitive Therapy and internationally recognized for her groundbreaking contributions to CBT, including co-authoring Mind Over Mood, one of the most influential CBT texts in the world. A big thank you again to the Academy for making this project possible. So let's get started. Janeé, I'm going to start with you. When did you first begin to recognize that some of our CBT interventions needed to adapt or evolve to better meet the needs of diverse clients?
Mhm. I can recall an experience early on in my career as a CBT clinician where I was working with a young African American woman who was experiencing challenges in her PhD program. A lot of the issues she talked about surrounded race and racism that she was experiencing in her department. So she talked about challenges to her proposed dissertation topic and even like her future plans for a research agenda. So as I began to listen to her and think about my application of CBT techniques, I kind of, shrunk a little thinking like, well, I don't really want to examine the evidence or even suggest that she work towards devising alternative ways of looking at this situation because that seems like it would be invalidating. But, like most of the CBT literature says that that's our primary technique, right? Like that's where we start when we're beginning to help clients examine their automatic thoughts and looking at the ways that their thinking is contributing to the reactions that they're having. And then another thought that came to my mind in my work was like, geez, I wish I had something to help me understand how to integrate the social cultural data that she was bringing into our sessions into my conceptualization of her concerns. And so as I began to ponder those two issues for myself as her clinician, I began to also like note that absence in the broader field of CBT.
Amazing. Yeah. So, Christine, I'm curious, how about you? When did you start to see this need as well? And how has your perspective on adapting CBT developed over time?
Well, it's interesting, Katie and Janae. For me, it was also early in my CBT career. My career began in 1978, which was the 70s were marked by my very active involvement in both the women's movement and then the lesbian and gay rights movements. And those movements in the 70s, simultaneously with me being a graduate student in clinical psychology, sensitized me to the importance that culture and cultural biases and cultural discrimination had the influences that those things had on individual thoughts and feelings and behaviors and even physical reactions at times. And I think anyone watching this can think about how your own thoughts, feelings, behaviors differ when you're at work or at home or with your family, or how your own cultural background influences these. But I think that especially for people who are somehow marginalized or disadvantaged in society for whatever reason, whether it's immigration status, gender, race, I think those people are much more sensitive and aware than people who may not be marginalized in those ways. Those experiences helped me become more aware of the importance of culture and environment, that it wasn't just individual issues. So early on in my career, in the early to mid 80s, I developed what I called very simply the 5-part model, which took individual thoughts, feelings, behaviors, and physical reactions and put them in the context of a big environmental circle, which was meant to be both historical environments from your life as well as modern day environments in culture. And I also, in the 80s, in 1989, published the first article on use of CBT with lesbians. And I titled that article, Attaining and Maintaining a Positive Self-Identity. And that was attaining and maintaining a positive self-identity in the context of cultural biases and discrimination. And with my clients, like Janeé, I found myself sometimes targeting environmental change as a goal of therapy rather than looking at their thoughts and emotions and behaviors, especially when their thoughts. I'm thinking particularly of a woman I worked with who was working in a very toxic work environment. She had tremendous high scores on anxiety measures. She had a very abusive, cruel boss who was targeting her. And I ended up proposing to her, giving her choices and collaborating with her, but we decided helping her change her job site was probably the most useful thing we could do in therapy. And interestingly enough, as soon as she switched jobs, her anxiety completely disappeared. So to me, that was validation that sometimes it's the environment that needs to change, not the individual. And I I feel it's so clear to me that this is the case, and you'd think this issue would be settled by now, the importance of culture and environments. But I still, like Janeé, see a relative absence of culture and environment in many of the CBT models. Although many people do get it. And I must say my 5-part model, which I thought at the time as a very simple development in the field, and we later published it in Mind Over Mood that I co-wrote with Dennis Greenberger. The 5-part model is one of my most cited ideas throughout the literature. Even today, I still get many requests every year for people to include it in chapters and articles. So I'm hopeful that I've contributed in that small way.
And Christine, I think this brings me back to sort of my early days of learning about CBT, and maybe the distinctions between what we learned in graduate school and then what we start to gather in our own individual training later. And boy, that environmental piece was something that was really missed in the early training that I received, and
Yeah.
and that great happily I got later on. But that this conversation really sets the stage for why this matters so much. And Janeé, you've been putting these ideas into practice in a really concrete way. In your book, you take on this challenge very directly, and this is an incredible book. I really recommend that people go out and buy it if they don't have it in their library. It's wonderful. And we'll definitely provide a link for purchasing this book in this video. But I want to hear from you. How do you address the need for change? And what do you hope readers, both maybe clinicians and clients, will take away from it?
Yeah, well, I think at a very basic level, it really starts with understanding your own worldview and the importance of being able to explore the worldview of the client. So really, a first thing that I was trying to do in the book was to provide opportunity for individuals to do some self-introspection around their worldview. and how they might begin to explore that of the client. And the primary way in which I do that is through a discussion of a recent advancement in the multicultural counseling literature developed by Jesse Owen and colleagues, known as multicultural orientation. And so that idea consists of three primary constructs: cultural humility, cultural comfort, which is like the ease at which you're able to explore these topics, and then also cultural opportunities. And so, cultural humility is like a stance and something that we can develop that's based on our values, but cultural comfort and cultural opportunities, I think that those are ideas that we take the best advantage of through practice. And so another thing that's pretty consistent throughout my book as well is like there are lots of opportunities for practice, for guided practice. So I give you examples and then I provide opportunities for you to try it for yourself. And so that's really like the first goal that I had with the book, is to provide that opportunity for self introspection. And then I also wanted to teach like some skills that people could add to their repertoire to help uh, make these conversations easier. So the first thing that I talked about, and the primary thing that I talked about is a skill called broaching. And that is developed by a woman named Norma Day Vines and her colleagues. And basically all that refers to is like the intentional efforts on the part of the therapist to explore issues related to race, ethnicity, or culture with their clients. And so again, I talk about what that looks like within a CBT context and provide opportunities for that. And then kind of the last goal, more directly related to CBT practice, is the application of social cultural data into how we conceptualize our clients' concerns, the cognitive models that we use, and then the interventions that we implement as well.
So, Janeé, I hear reverberations of what you've been talking about your book, that I heard from your article. And I want to just sort of take you back for a moment to the article that you wrote for the Academy blog, and this wonderful moment that you describe where you're working with an African adult male and working on how to adapt your practice to working with him. I think that's a great example of what you're talking about.
Yeah, I do too, because it's a good illustration of how, although we may have similarities with clients, there are often important differences that still require us to check our own biases and then be intentional in exploring and learning more about the worldviews of our clients. So as you mentioned, this client was of we're both of African descent, but he immigrated here from South Africa, and I am African American. And his initial complaint regarded anxiety and depression. And so, we did this typical CBT approach, and he was having some success with that. There was some reduction in his symptoms, but it only seemed to go so far. And so I began to wonder, like what else could be missing, what other interventions might be helpful for this individual. And in doing some research about his cultural background, I learned that there are often spiritual explanations for psychological problems in his cultural worldview. And so I asked him about that one day, and he seemed very relieved, and he said, "Yes, absolutely." And so then we began to talk about what that looked like more specifically for him, which was different than what it might have looked like for me, because although we both came from Christian backgrounds, like he also had a more spiritual, African-centered religious worldview that included like direct input from his ancestors that I necessarily wouldn't adopt. So it really required me to be curious about his worldview and to ask him some questions about what that was like, what that meant, how he integrated his understanding of those explanations into his like unique personal explanation of what he was going through in his own personal life at the time. And so by doing that, we uncovered some other core beliefs that primarily he had this belief that he was doomed to be unhappy in life because he was paying for the sins of his ancestors. And until he was able to fix their wrongs, he would always be unhappy. And so we began to look at what he could do from his cultural perspective to do just that, because those were his beliefs. And so we decided that part of his plan might be to work with spiritual advisors who could guide him through that process better than I could as an outsider. But then we began to also look at ways that he can begin to implement other things into his perspective, such as compassion and acknowledging the progress he was actually making in changing like the cultural patterns and norms that had been problematic in his family line until him.
Yeah, really interesting. Yeah. So, Christine, you've spoken about your support for Janeé's vision for adapting CBT for African Americans. What stood out to you most in her perspective?
Wow, what stood out most is hard to say because I can honestly say I learned more from reading your book, Janeé, than any CBT book I've read in a decade or longer. Because I read a lot of CBT books, and because I've been in the field for more than 45 years, usually when I read the books, I'm recognizing 80, 90% of what's being said, and I'm learning a few nuggets here and there, and that's good. But I can honestly say in your book, I think every few pages, I really sat back and thought deeply about what you were writing. It's such a well-written book, and it's just filled with ideas that were quite new to me and thought-provoking, and that I thought marked just such a giant step forward in our understanding about how to explore and integrate culture into CBT. Even beyond working with African American clients, I've talked to you about this, that I really think that your model that you've developed is a full model that could be applied, with content changes, but the same processes could easily be applied to working with clients of many different cultures and types of differences from us as therapists. And I also was so impressed with your clinical case examples and therapist-client dialogues in the book. I mean, they really rang true to this particular time in our history, in which race has been really under a spotlight in our country, and it. I just thought it was a tour de force. It's just I enjoyed reading it. I looked forward every day to sitting down with it and reading it, and I would read it, and I would, as you said, you modeled great curiosity in the book, and you really piqued my curiosity with your questions and your things that you have the reader go through and think about as they're reading it. So my hat is off to you.
Thank you.
And I have to say, as a practicing clinician, having read your book, it's been sort of an interesting thing that's happened to me in my therapy sessions with my own patients that, I'm asking questions that I didn't ask before. I'm considering things that I haven't considered before. And, boy, I mean, if you want sort of a good idea, like a way to really know that a book has helped shape your clinical practice, it's when you're doing things differently than the way you did them before you read it. And I think it's great. So both of you are pointing to this bigger picture because even when the vision is clear, the context we're practicing in can represent real challenges, right? And given today's cultural context, I know, Christine, you sort of mentioned this, alluded to this before. What do you both see as the biggest barriers or obstacles to advancing cultural competence among mental health professionals? And how do we begin to overcome them?
I
Janeé, would you like to go first? Yeah.
Sure. Three things stand out for me, really. The first, based on feedback that I got from my book, would be low self-efficacy. I had some colleagues who were very complimentary of the book, but when they were talking to me about it, they also kind of like whispered, every time you said, now you try it, I kind of cringed inside and I thought, no, I just want you to tell me the answer. And so, I just think a lot of us, we don't get like real opportunities for hands-on kind of practical applications of the ideas that we learn in our training programs as it relates to like multicultural therapy or even the things that we might learn post grad in professional development. And so I think just that sense that I can't do it or I don't know how to do it is a real barrier for a lot of clinicians. And along those lines, I think fear of just saying the wrong thing. Most of us care very deeply about our clients and we don't want to hurt them or to say things that might be offensive. And so I think many clinicians would prefer just not to say anything at all or to wait for the client to bring it up out of fear of saying the wrong thing. But unfortunately, for a lot of individuals, especially those with marginalized backgrounds, like that silence around issues of race and culture can actually be perceived as a microaggression and lead to subsequent cultural ruptures in that therapeutic relationship. And so, even though like that behavior, that avoidant behavior is coming from a place of care and concern, it can often have the opposite intended effect. And then the last thing I would say, kind of drawing actually from some of my dissertation research, was around the role of political ideology in clinicians' views of social justice in our field. Um, Sometimes people just resent what they perceive as others telling them what they have to believe politically or in terms of like their social mores and values. And so that resentment to the idea of someone is trying to force a belief or impose a belief onto them can also lead some resentment to exploration of broader cultural concerns in the therapeutic space as well.
Mm, yeah, absolutely. Christine, so what are your thoughts about this?
Well, I agree with uh, Janeé that I think that most therapists want to do whatever makes up good practices in therapy because we want to help our clients as best as possible. And I do think one of the biggest barriers in my decades teaching CBT is that if therapists don't feel confident in their skills, they're not going to practice them. And so one of the things I did when I was reading your book, Janeé, is because I'm not currently seeing clients, but I practice these skills socially with people that I met or with, because you have such good questions in your book to ask, and then good follow-up questions and good ways of responding to the answers that you get. And so I practice these, and this is something therapists could do to increase their confidence, is I practice these in social conversations. And man, was I surprised, people really opened up. They were eager to talk about cultural issues in their own life and their own experiences. They were eager to talk about how they identified and what struggles they had been through and what challenges they faced. And so one of the things that, I thought I would do if I was currently practicing clinician is I would make copies of your good questions because you pepper them throughout the book. And I would actually put those on a notepad in front of myself in therapy and refer to them to prompt me and help me remember the kinds of questions to ask. Because I do think some therapists might feel resentful, and I know there are some therapists who still think dealing with culture in therapy is relatively unimportant. But I wonder what your clients think. And there is actually a huge literature that shows that clients who feel like the therapist doesn't get them or doesn't see their culture, as you say, doesn't ask about it or address it in any way, that causes real ruptures in the therapy alliance. So I think it really is on us as therapists to get more comfortable with these issues. But I think once therapists begin to try your approach, like Katie was saying, they're going to be so amazed at how it opens up new, very fruitful avenues in therapy and helps clients get better more quickly. That in and of itself is going to be very rewarding for therapists. I think once they put their feet in the water, they're going to want to go all in.
Yeah. And maybe we could sort of approach this from a personal challenge perspective for each clinician, right? That, if you're one of these people that believes that, oh, culture or issues like this don't have any place in the therapy relationship or in the therapeutic model, you know, the challenge is maybe investigate that. Ask your clients what they think and see what information you get back, and then make your decision as to how important or unimportant you think it is. And so excellent points. So, I want to shift for a minute and start talking about what's going to come next for us, sort of as a field. And looking ahead, Janeé, what's your vision for the future of CBT? Where are we headed? And do you think it's achievable?
Yeah, I am really excited about all of the advancements in the new literature that is already coming out regarding culturally adapted models of CBT. And so I just hope our future contains more of that. And, particularly scholarship that comes from the voices of individuals with marginalized identities. We've talked a lot about worldview and how that influences the way we see our clients and our concerns, but it also influences the theories that we use as well. And so I just hope that CBT continues to grow to include more broader and diverse perspectives. Along those lines, just also additional research, I think from a social justice perspective that contributes to our understanding of the ways in which marginalization and oppression contribute to psychological distress. Um, you know, Many people are still fighting for basic rights. And so I think us as like psychologists, counselors, social workers, whatever kind of helper we are, like we have a unique understanding of these relationships, and we could be really valuable in helping to support efforts that allow people to live like fuller, more happy and liberated lives.
Absolutely. Such a great way to think about it too, that we as a field, I think, we're very accustomed to medical models that are like we're searching for the cause of various problems. Like, we want to search for the cure for cancer, the underlying causes of cancer. But somehow in mental health, when it comes to culture, we need to shift this perspective and really start looking for, the causes of the problems that we're seeing these days. I'll shift over to you, Christine. What is your vision for the future of CBT?
Well, Katie, as you know, I've always been very radically client-centered, collaborative, and strengths-based. Those are kind of the qualities as a therapist that I try to foster in myself and in other therapists. And I think these three things, client-centeredness, collaboration, and strengths-based therapy, are all much better when there's a conscious inclusion of culture and
Yeah,
in our therapy relationships. I actually agree with Janeé. I think this is very achievable. I'm very late in my career, and I feel really excited about the future of CBT because I know people like Janeé Steele who are pushing the boundaries of our knowledge in very exciting and capable ways. And I I really can't wait to see what comes next in your work, Janeé, and also to see how your work echoes throughout other areas of the field, because I've observed over the decades that ideas that seem a bit radical or a bit, off step with the main trajectory of the field often end up moving the field in very exciting and good ways and good developments. So I'm hopeful that in another 10 years, this discussion will seem like people will watch it, students will watch it and say, Really? Was that an issue back then? Oh.
But yes, yes, it is. You're right, Christine. So thank you so much to Janeé and Christine for sharing your insights today. And thank you to everyone who's going to be watching this for joining us. This is just the beginning of our new blog project with the Academy, and we're so excited for what's ahead. So we'll see you next time. Thanks.